Assalamualaikum everybody.
Waalaikum
Some
assalam.
people can come out despite the weather. 'Cause I know like it's Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah, so hurry up.
Huh?
So hurry up.
Hurry up. So we all have, you know what I'm saying, somewhere to be. Inshallah, this won't be. I hope it won't be long. I have a lot of information. I don't even know if I'll get through it today, and this is a little different. But at any rate, somebody just walked in. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله عليم بذات الصدور. That is an ayah from the Quran, and the meaning of it is indeed Allah knows what is in their hearts or what is in their breasts. Another ayah from the Quran, الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله على بذكر الله تطمئن قلوب. And the meaning of that ayah is those who believe and have they find calmness in their hearts through the remembrance of Allah. Surely for those who find calmness in their hearts, they find that calmness in the remembrance of Allah. Allahu waliyya alladhina amanu yukhrijuhum min dhulumati illa an-nur. That is a part of an ayah. And the series here that I'm doing is primarily based on that part of the ayah. And that ayah means that Allah is the protecting guardian of those who believe. He brings them from darkness to light. And you'll hear me discuss that ayah over and over again because it has a lot of meaning in it. The next part is Inna Allah لا يغير وما إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما أنفسهم. So Allah does not change the condition of people until they change themselves. And والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا. Surely those who strive in our way, we open up our ways to them. All of those ayahs that I mentioned, I'll be discussing like over and over again. Maybe I won't be able to get to all of them today, but inshallah over the next coming weeks, those people who return will begin to understand how they tie in to what I'm going to talk about today. Now, how many of you know what I'm going to talk about? Just raise your hand if you know what I'm going to talk about. Anybody? Nobody? Okay. All right.
I read the
Great. So you kind of know what I'm going to talk about.
Right.
So how about if those who know what I'm going to talk about tell those who don't know, and then I don't have to talk. Okay? No. But seriously, the series was titled Out of Darkness to Light. Assessing our psychospiritual issues. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about are a lot of spiritual and mental health issues that have come up in in Muslim communities around the country and maybe even around the world. And I'll also be speaking about like the possibility of integrating certain aspects of Islam like tazkiyah and tasawwuf into counseling and therapy. Okay, and I'll be talking about some of the barriers and stuff like that to doing both of those things, inshallah, over time. Before I do my introduction, I wanted to tell a story. I wanted to tell a story from a hadith that is extremely important. I think a lot of times the wording of hadith tend to confuse us a little bit, or we read the stories of hadith and then we move along to the next hadith without really understanding what was taking place or what we were reading. So there is one hadith that I'm particularly fond of because I was told something by an older gentleman years ago, and this hadith is really significant. It highlights something that he said to me. The summary or the paraphrasing of this hadith is that there was a sahabi, a companion of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by the name of Hanzala Usaidi. And Hanzala Usaidi was he was a businessman, and he was a scribe. And because he was a businessman, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose him to conduct affairs between Muslims and with the non-Muslims around. So he would do some of the writing. It is not known whether or not Hanzala Usaidi actually was involved in compiling some of the Quran, but I'm sure that the other, the scholars, they know better than I, and Allah knows better than them. So at any rate, he was a scribe of Rasulullah. And one day, Hanzala was walking along, and he was, excuse me, he kind of didn't have the best countenance. He didn't have the best attitude, wherever he was. And Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, he ran into him, and he looked at Hanzala's face and his body, his demeanor, and he said, "Hanzala, what's wrong with you? What you got going on today?" And Abu Bakr could sense that something wasn't right. And what follows is extremely telling. Okay, Hanzala said, "Abu Bakr, I'm not feeling so hot today." And he's, "Well, what do you mean you're not feeling so hot today?" He was like, I'm not well, I'm not doing okay." "What do you mean you're not doing okay?" And he said, Hanzala, he referred to himself in the third person, okay? He said, "Hanzala has turned into a hypocrite." And he was like, "Huh? Explain that to me. What do you mean you turned into a hypocrite?" Okay? And he said, "You know what? When I'm around Prophet Muhammad, when I'm listening to Prophet Muhammad, I'm on point. I'm doing everything that I need to do. Okay? I'm on my prayer. I'm doing my dhikr. I'm reciting Quran. I'm standing up for justice. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. Okay? And my heart feels at peace." And he said, "When I leave Prophet Muhammad and I go back to work and I start dealing with my family, I start doing the everyday, monotonous tasks, all of a sudden, I forget everything that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. And so that's why I'm a hypocrite." Listen to what Abu Bakr says. Abu Bakr said, "You know what, Hanzala? I'm in the same situation." Now, we all have some history. We know a little bit about Abu Bakr. So it's kind of funny that you have somebody, one of the rightly guided, okay, saying, "I'm in the same position." So Abu Bakr says to Hanzala, "Yeah, let's go visit the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Okay, and Hanzala was a little bit nervous to do it, but they went. And when they came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "What's going on? What's the problem today?" He asked Abu Bakr, but Abu Bakr didn't respond. Hanzala said, "When I'm around you, when I'm listening to you, when you're instructing us, I'm full of faith, I'm full of iman, I'm full of trust in Allah. And I do everything that I'm supposed to do. However, when I go back to my family, when I go to work, when I'm conducting business in the marketplace and all of that, I forget. I forget everything, and I turn into a hypocrite." And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after hearing that, he said, "By him in whose hand is my life," meaning Allah, "if your state of mind remains the same as it is in my presence, and you are always busy in the remembrance of Allah, in the dhikr of Allah, the angels will shake hands with you in your beds and in your paths." Okay? And there are two separate versions of this hadith. One of the hadith says that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam continued and he said, "But this happens from time to time." And then in the other version of the hadith, he continues and he instructs him and he says, "The angels will shake your hands in your beds and in your paths." Okay? He said to Hanzala, time should be devoted to your worldly affairs and time should be devoted to your prayer and your dhikr, your meditation. And he said it 3 times. And the best version of the hadith that I found was that not only did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, "Relax, you know what, this does happen, but there is a way to deal with it," okay? And what he was saying to Hanzala was, when you're out doing those things, remember Allah, okay? When you're at the bank, remember Allah. When you're at the market, at the grocery store, remember Allah. When you're paying that bill, you're on the phone with the bill collector and they being nasty to you, right? Remember Allah. When you get home from work and you got to check your mailbox and you know it's another bill coming, remember Allah. That's what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying. Now I want to go back and revisit it because, like I said before, when we read hadith, a lot of times we speed read, we don't take it piece by piece by piece. It was very, very important that Abu Bakr didn't do what so many of us tend to do today. When we see people walk past us in the streets, when we see people walk past us in the grocery stores, when we see people walk past us at work, at school, even at the masjid and other places, we sense that those people are experiencing something, that they've got some kind of trouble. You can tell by their facial expression. But what we tend to do, because we're so busy with our lives, we sometimes just simply ignore those facial expressions, the troubled looks. And at other times, we purposely ignore the facial expressions and the looks that the people had. Okay? Abu Bakr didn't do that. He didn't do that. He actually asked Hanzala, "What's wrong?" I want you to think for a minute, okay? When was the last time that somebody saw you and really, truthfully inquired as to what was wrong? And furthermore, when was the last time you actually stopped and really, really inquired as to what was wrong with somebody? Now, some of you I know, and there are others I don't, but just think about it in general terms. Even if you do it for yourself, if you do it for yourself, say alhamdulillah that Allah gave you the mind to do it. But even I am guilty of walking past somebody, seeing the look on their face, and I'm thinking, you know what? I probably don't want to touch that today. Let me get to where I need to be. Okay? So I'm going to come back to this hadith, but I wanted to, talk about it a little bit because it shapes what things I'm getting ready to say to you now. The other thing that I wanted to point out about this particular hadith is this story gets rid of the idea that many of us have been taught that we don't share, that we have to be pretentious, that we have to pretend that we're always on the hop, that we're always, right where we need to be in Deen al-Islam, when we have a companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, I'm not always there. Not only do we have one companion saying it, we have two. Okay? So I want you to think about that as I start to discuss some of these issues. Okay? Now, the other reason I picked that hadith is because I wanted to make you feel comfortable understanding that the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam shared their lives, the good and the bad. And there are a lot of us who are afraid of knowing each other in that way. As I was preparing for these talks and I was introducing some of the material to a brother, he expressed caution. And one of the reasons why he expressed caution was because he was worried about ghibah. And I said, well, could you explain? Obviously, I know what the word means, but I wanted him to explain. And he said, well, man, people are backbiting and, they learn something about you and they use it against you and stuff like that. Well, I want to assure you, before I give you my introduction, that I'm not worried about that. I'm already married, and my wife knows all of this stuff about me. I've been on a job where things have been found out about me, and I've lost that job because of those things that were found out about me, and I had to go to mediation and all that stuff to be righted, okay? I've lost family and friends because of something that I will share. So I'm not really worried about the backbiting, okay? So, but again, that's the reason why I mentioned that hadith, okay? One of the reasons. Professionally, I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor, and primarily my main function is working with, obviously, people who are struggling to overcome substance abuse. And I do a lot of group facilitation. If anybody here has seen the movie Sandra Bullock was in 28 Days, if you've seen 28 Days, where they're in the facility and you've got the facilitator there kind of asking people if they want to say stuff or that's basically my role, okay? But also I tend to focus on cognitive issues, cognitive distortions. And if you don't know what that means, basically that means that every now and then I have fun getting to call somebody out on behavior that they don't want to change, behavior that they're blaming on somebody else, and manipulation and stuff like that. So basically them making excuses to keep doing the things that they're doing. All right. I've worked with people who've been severely depressed, okay, all types of anxieties, so schizophrenia and paranoia, okay, are two of the big ones, and then within that, there are different categorizations, okay. Obviously, I mentioned the cognitive behavioral issues, and later on down the road, I'll talk about those a little bit more, and you'll begin to see that cognitive behavioral issues aren't just the property of the mentally ill. We all have cognitive behavioral dissonance, okay? I've dealt with clients who have what's referred to as DID, dissociative identity disorder. A lot of you may be familiar with that in terms of it being called split personality, all right? And others who had, borderline traits. I've also done a lot of work with juvenile sex offenders, victims, things of that nature, all right? Personally, I've had the experience with some of those things that I mentioned. Now you all understand why that hadith was important. okay? As a result of some unfortunate sexual encounters as a child, and you know, shame and identity issues. As a teenager, I found myself battling what I didn't know at the time was depression. Okay, and I always laugh because I'll never forget writing a suicide note, leaving it at, you know, a female friend's house, and this female friend's mom found my notebook full of suicide ideation. Okay, and she brought that notebook to my mom, and you know, I was panicking, of course, because I thought I lost my notebook. Well, I did, and lo and behold, it's at this girl's house like this, and all of a sudden, I'm in deep stuff. So I'm in high school, and I've got all these counselors checking on me every day, trying to make sure I'm okay and going through that stuff, and I really don't know what's happening, nor does my family. And in fact, as a teenager, I did what most teenagers did. I hid it from my parents, because as it goes, you know, a lot of people aren't really ready to acknowledge stuff like this, okay? So I also, you know, battle a certain type of anxiety. I tell people now, I am a compulsive worrier. If my wife calls me and says, hey, I need to talk to you, I'm going to worry about what she needs to talk to me about. If my wife calls me and tells me, I don't need to talk to you, I'm going to worry about what my wife doesn't want to talk to me about, okay? As I prepared my talks, I went over and over and over and over again and over again and over again, because I'm a worrier. That's what I do, okay? And I actually have to journal and talk to my wife and talk to, you know, mentors and different people, so that I can keep myself in check about this, all right? And I also dealt with other compulsive behaviors. Though I did not experience addiction on the level of being homeless and losing everything and things of that sort, you know, I discovered that I did have the addictive mind. And if you're not addictive, you know, if you're not familiar with the addictive mind, then outside of this, I can give you some readings, some good textbooks and lectures and stuff like that to learn about the addictive mind. Because a lot of people who are not familiar with addictions tend to think that if this is crack cocaine, this person likes crack cocaine and nothing else. And for a lot of people who are addicted to substance, it's not just this. They can find a wall to be addicted to if they have the addictive mind, okay? So I, you know, I think I took my first drink at like maybe 11 or 12, and that was the greatest thing ever. It was, okay? It was really, really cool at 13 to say, woo, what is this feeling about? And so, you know, I found who I could get the stuff from, and I snuck some into my backpack and, you know, go into the bathroom real quick, take a quick sip and keep it moving. But I never thought, you know, hey, it was a problem. I thought it was fun. I really did. And not until I started doing work with teens and learning more about myself did I really figure out that I had the addictive mind, okay? Anytime alcohol was around, out of all my buddies, I was the only one who couldn't remember where I could put my keys. And obviously now, you know why I couldn't find my keys, right? Because they took them, okay? They took my keys. And I always like to tell the story of when Mike Tyson got out of jail and fought Evander Holyfield, okay? Because what happened? What was the big thing that happened when Mike Tyson fought Evander Holyfield? He bit his ear off. He bit his ear off, right? And guess what? I missed it. I missed it. And you know why I missed it? Because, you know, well, earlier that evening, we all gathered up all our money and we went and had somebody buy some stuff for us. And we had a blast. Well, I was conscious for the first fight. I was okay for the second fight. I don't remember anything but a big girl sitting on my leg, breaking the chair, and hurting my knee, and I was sore for like a week. That's all I remember, okay? And from that point, I was like, uh-oh, I was in trouble. Now, crazy part about that was I was in an organization called the Nation of Islam at that very time, okay? So, see, the story is going to turn here in a minute. Now, in addition to that, 2003, maybe, something like that, I hurt my Achilles tendon, snapped it, had to have surgery. And it was painful. It was extremely painful. They gave me some pain medication for it. And I was in a lot of pain. And, you know, I needed it. But because I like the feeling, I took too many of them, okay? And now I've got my wife's mom coming over to the apartment, making greens and putting castor oil in them and all that kind of stuff because I can't use the bathroom. And if you don't know a whole lot about the majority of painkillers on the market, what they do is they shut down your organ functions, okay? So if you overdose, you may feel like you gotta go, but it's not happening, okay? And that's when I started to realize, you know what? I like stuff too much. I need to learn to hate some things, okay? So I wanted to tell you all that so that you understand that the things that I'm talking about are not just from a textbook, that is actually, you know, part of my experience. The funny thing about it is around 2003, around that same time, we're living in New York, my wife had purchased, or actually in 2002, my wife had purchased a CD on Tahara, on the purification of, you know, the body before prayer. And it was like 5 or 6 CDs in this box. And we would just listen to this thing because, you know, we weren't listening to music at the time, so we traveled and just kind of listened to the CD, you know. I mean, probably somebody would hear it and be like, man, this is boring, but we would just listen to it. And I listened to it because I thought that it was a popular shape. I was like a lot of other people who felt like I needed to listen to the popular shape at that time. And so we kept it, Well, now we're living in a different place, and you know, I'm still doing stuff in my mind. You know, I'm trying to find a way to please my nafs, please my desires. One day, I'm in the other room on a computer trying to look at some stuff that I don't need to be looking at, and you all know what I'm talking about. And somehow, when I clicked on a link, something crazy happened with the computer, and it shifted me from that link all the way to some Islamic talks. So here it is, I'm trying to look at something haram, something sinful, and I click a button and the computer goes haywire and it sends me over here to this Islamic website. And I'm like, what in the world? So I started looking through that because in addition to looking at haram, you know, it was just the internet. I could just sit there on the internet. And so I started clicking on those names. And as I clicked through the names, I saw one that looked familiar. And I stopped and I played a lecture. And when I heard the man's voice, it sounded like the same man's voice and looked like the same man's name that was on the CD that we had. And so I got excited. I ran through the house, went out to the car, got the CD, brought it back in, and I'm comparing it. I'm like, oh, wow, it's the same guy. And as it turns out, it wasn't Mr. Popular Shake that I thought I was listening to. It was some other no-name guy who just happened to be really, really knowledgeable. So I ran through the house, and now my wife is looking at me, and she's like, what in the world is he doing? The funny part about it was, I had been doing all of that stuff, and my wife hadn't asked me. My wife wouldn't talk to me, because at that time, my wife and I were on the verge of divorce, okay? And I'm just still feeding my nafs. I'm doing what I'm doing. So I run through this house, I get these blank CDs, I pop one in because I've got to download these talks now. And it was very, very interesting. At that very, very moment, at that second, something began to change the course of my adult existence, okay? We moved. I kept listening to those talks. And I listened to those talks for about 2 years. I would just keep going back to the website and downloading more talks. As it turns out, the Sheikh was putting a talk on the internet once or twice a week. So I just kept pulling them, okay? We moved back to New York, and I finally decided that I need to try to get in touch with this man. But I got in touch with this man out of my nafs. I got in touch with this man so that I could try to become some big alim, some big scholar, okay? And I sent the email over. And when I sent the email through the website, a couple days later, one of his assistants sent me an email back. And he asked for my phone number. Well, by the time I got off work and made it home, the brother called and he said, the Sheikh wants you to call him right now. So you need to call him right now. And I was like, what? No, you need to get off the phone with me and you need to call the Sheikh right now. We don't make the Sheikh wait. And I was like, okay. So I ran and told my wife, and my wife was like, well, why are you standing here looking at me? So I called the Sheikh, okay? Sheikh answered the phone, and he said, how are you? How is your family? He said, I got your email, I'm looking at it. Because I also put in the email the issues that I had been struggling with, okay? And he said, or I put in something, I didn't put in everything. And he learned a little bit about where I was from, okay, what kind of work I did, and things of that nature. And this is key. Listen to the very next thing that he said to me. He said, what are you struggling with? And I did not know how to respond. And the reason why I didn't know how to respond was because in all the time that I had been a Muslim, since 1993, and all the time that I had been a Muslim, no one had ever asked me, what are you struggling with? What's the problem that you have? Of course, people knew how to tell me, wear your pants above your ankle, wear your kufi, give your wife this much for an allowance, pray like this, not like that. But nobody had ever asked me, what are you struggling with? And now, I want you to think about it, because I mentioned it before. I want you to think about, when has somebody sincerely stopped you in your tracks and said, what are you struggling with? Did they mean it? And then, when have you taken the opportunity to actually be honest with the individual and say, this is what I'm struggling with, and mean it? Allah says in the Quran, "Qulu qawlan sadidan," speak a word straight. when has somebody actually done that with you, and when have you done it? Okay? The interesting part about that is that interaction with the sheikh began to lead me towards acknowledging that I had issues, spiritual issues and psychological issues. Okay? It led me to using the employee assistance program at my job, getting on the phone and saying, hey, look, you know what? I got a problem. I need some help. And that was a really, really big step for me. Okay? And I thank Allah that whoever that lady was, she stayed on the phone with me for like an hour, talking to me and finding resources for me and finding counseling for me. Okay? That was very, very important. The sheikh that I met encouraged me to do that. Okay? You need to find somebody who you can talk to. Okay? And he asked me, he said, can you read the Quran? And I said, of course I can read the Quran. What are you talking about, man? He said, no. He said, what I'm asking you is, do you have the ability? And I didn't understand what he meant by ability. He wasn't asking me, do I know how to read the Quran? He was asking me, are you in a condition that you're even able to pick up the Quran? What he was saying to me is, are you that sick psychologically that it pains you to even pick it up? That's what he meant. Because I don't think that a lot of us realize that we have Muslims among us who they just walk right past the Quran. We have Muslims among us who they may be able to pick up the Quran, but they cannot stand to read the words in it. There are Muslims among us who have a very bad feeling when they hear the adhan call, okay? But they're not going to tell you that. They feel it, but they're not going to tell you that, and there are reasons why. So this sheikh helped me begin to confront some of those mountains. And later on down the road, we'll talk about how to confront some of those mountains. So I wanted to give you the professional, the personal, and the spiritual part so that you had a very good understanding of where I was coming from, or where I am coming from. Okay? Now, I'll try to move it along because I want to get to the meat of this subject. I like to tell the story of Farmer Brown. And this is one of the things that I do. A lot of people who work with me, substance abuse and everything, they always laugh because they're like, man, how do you come up with these stories? They're just crazy. But stories, short stories tend to really, really get our attention. There was a man named Farmer Brown who lived in a very, very rural town. A town that did not have electricity. They didn't have utility service out there at the time. And they finally, the utility company came in and said, hey, we're putting up wire for electricity around here. Would you like it? And Farmer Brown said, yeah, sign me up for that. I want that. And then the utility company worker, he said, yeah, okay, that's great, sir, but you see that tree over there? We're going to have to cut that tree down. And he said, what tree? Mr. Brown, the one right there with the swing on it. We've got to cut that tree down. And he said, well, why do you have to cut that tree down? He said, well, we've got to cut that tree down in order to bring the wire through here so you can have electricity for your house. And he said, well, can't you just go around that tree? He said, no, the blueprints and everything, all that stuff we have, it says it has to come right through here. And he was like, well, is there somebody I can talk to about this? And he said, well, here's a number. You can call these people, you can talk to them about it, but I've been told from my boss that this is what we've got to do. Okay? So, obviously, Farmer Brown, you know, he needed to write a letter. Because Farmer Brown didn't even have a telephone. He needed to write a letter to the company. And the company sent back a letter to Farmer Brown saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, we can't do it. The utility worker comes back out, and he's like, Mr. Brown, are you ready? we've got to cut it down. Mr. Brown said, you know what? No, I don't think I want the electricity. And the utility worker says, well, wait a minute. You're a farmer. You got your family here. What do you do with your meat? Where are you putting it? Okay. Do you want TV? Do you want to be informed about the weather and things of this nature? Things that can help you prepare. And Farmer Brown said, well, yeah, but you can't cut my tree down. Okay. And he said, well, okay, sir. If the tree can't come down, it's simple. The wires aren't going up. So Farmer Brown said, all right, then I'm done. I guess I won't have electricity. Okay. I tell that story because it sounds like something else that I'm going to mention here in a minute. Farmer Brown was old school. Farmer Brown was familiar with his way. Farmer Brown had his tradition, and Farmer Brown wanted to keep it. Okay? What's interesting about this particular story is Farmer Brown didn't tell the utility worker this. He had an attachment to that tree and to that swing. Why? Because Farmer Brown's grandparents, they put it there. His grandparents put the swing up. His grandparents and parents would swing him on that swing. Farmer Brown used that swing for his kids. So it had a lot of sentimental value. Okay? The other part of the story is Farmer Brown had a lot of other trees around. Was it the tree or was it the swing? Okay? Could he have just put that swing on another tree because of that sentimental value? All right? I tell that story because when it comes to mental health and mental illness within the Muslim community, we have a lot of Farmer Browns. We have a lot of people who are used to doing things the way that they've always done things. Okay? They're used to having an old perspective about mental illness and about mental health. And the perspective that exists in the Muslim community is not unlike the perspective that exists, say for instance, in the African American community. The African American community is accepting of drug abuse. We know that people struggle with that. We're not really ready to accept that somebody battles depression. Okay? We don't really like to talk about that the way we might talk about substance abuse. Good example. If you go in urban cities and you go to masjids there, you'll see that it's fairly common to hear a lot of African Americans discuss, well, you know, brother so-and-so, you know, yeah, for a minute he was on that stuff, man, but alhamdulillah, we're working with it. Okay? We get that. We get that. But we don't get, oh, sister so-and-so, she's self-injurious, meaning that she's involved in hurtful stuff. She cuts herself, she burns herself, things of that nature. We don't talk about that, okay? We don't talk about the depression. We don't talk about the schizophrenia, okay? We don't talk about the anxieties. We don't even talk about the overeating, okay? We don't discuss those things. We don't talk about the addiction and the compulsive behavior towards pornography. We don't talk about that. We say it doesn't exist, okay? So that's why I say we're like Farmer Brown. Even Muslims, we don't really like to discuss those things, okay? We have a lot of imams who will say, don't look at haram. What is it? Okay? We know that we have these ideas of haram, but we've got a bunch of children walking around with iPads and iPhones, and they're on the internet all day. They're not looking at somebody who doesn't have a scarf on, okay? But we're quiet about it. We're very quiet about it. We are Farmer Brown, okay? Now, before I said we are Farmer Brown, many of you probably could have come up with an alternative, right? You may have been able to say, well, could Farmer Brown have done this? Could Farmer Brown have done that? Or could Farmer Brown have done something else? And that's one of the things that I want us to start thinking about is what are some of the alternatives? You heard me say earlier, this is about integrating approaches to mental health and counseling with Islamic perspectives. But we have to really, really check into the breadth of what our Islamic perspectives can be. Okay? Now, in 2011 and going into 2012, there were a lot of Muslim professionals, doctoral students, psychiatrists and psychologists who decided to put together a study to find out what the perspectives were of imams and community leaders on mental health. Okay, and this study is extremely telling. Okay, it's scary actually for me. For me, it's scary because I know what's out there, and a lot of times I don't discuss what's out there with everybody. Obviously, I talk to my wife about it, but even some of the things that I know, I don't talk to her about. Okay, I want you to listen to just a snippet of this that I highlighted, and I can give you the link if you would like to read the entire thing for yourself. Okay, but it's interesting. One of the first things that they learned was that imams and community leaders were not able to distinguish between mental health issues and spiritual issues. Okay. One of the other things that they found out was that if an imam recognized that the seriousness of someone's mental illness was beyond their scope, they were reluctant to seek outside professional help for the individual. Okay? And I mean, just keep this stuff in your mind because I've got some other things for you. Okay? The purpose of the study was to really answer three major questions. And one of the first ones was, you know, could they recognize the severity of the mental health problem, number one. Number two, would imams be willing to refer a person with symptoms of a serious illness to a clinician or a mental health worker, someone of that sort? And did age consultation experience, meaning that did the imam have any interaction with mental health professionals himself? Did his experience or counseling training correlate with his perspective on actually seeking help for any of his congregants? Okay, and they surveyed 62 imams. Okay. And one of the things that was neat about this survey is they created a fictitious person. They named him Mr. Ahmed. And Mr. Ahmed is like, he was 62. He lost his wife 2 years ago, and he was displaying depressive symptoms, okay? And they gave them this scenario of, he comes to you after Jummah prayer, and he's telling you that, he's really he looks bad, he's disheveled, he hasn't taken care of his appearance, he's still moping around, and he just really wants the imam to do something. And they wanted the imams to respond to this particular scenario, okay? I don't know if you all know this or not, but it's been said that we have a grieving period within Islam. We have a grieving period for when somebody dies. Is everybody familiar with that? Anybody know what the grieving period is? Do you know? 3 days. 3 days. 3 days is your grieving period.
Not 40.
3 days. Okay? Now, we can go with 3 days. We can go with 40. In fact, I like 40 because 40 is still problematic. Okay? I'll never forget the story of a sister who shared that she lost her mother. She's a Muslim. This Muslim sister lost her mother, and it was sudden. She needed help with a burial. Okay? She needed a lot of mental, emotional support. And she reported in her female halakha that, you know, she was still really having a hard time dealing with this. And you want to know what the women told her? Your grieving period is 3 days.
Well, where's the Quranic dalil for the 3 days?
Exactly. That's my point. Okay? That's my point. You see? I'm glad that you asked that. Because I didn't want to present that. Okay? Because I know how scant that is. But it is thought to be a very, very acceptable practice. Okay? In fact, it's thought to be a very acceptable practice, or it was thought to be a very acceptable practice up until psychiatrists and psychologists started considering grieving. Okay? It was thought that there had to be a certain time frame for something like grieving. Okay? But now everybody feels it, but they don't say it, that, you know what, something about that just doesn't seem right. And if you know somebody who's lost a loved one, whether it was tragic, due to illness, or whatever the case, ask them if they've really ever truly gotten over it. Okay? And some of the people are shaking their head no. I have a friend. I say I have a friend. See, even my own grieving stuff is coming out. Who, she was a very popular author who passed away just a few weeks ago. I mean, a bright light. A bright light. And she's still in my Facebook list. I used to talk to her quite a bit. And I'm just floored by, wow, she was here yesterday. She was literally here yesterday. And now I don't get to read her messages about encouraging my son to be a NASCAR driver anymore. So now, what's getting ready to happen in a few weeks? Does anybody know what's getting ready to happen that's big for my son? NASCAR starting back. Okay? NASCAR starting back. And what happens in about 62 days or something like that? Baseball. Well, she's a big Cardinals fan. And she loved the fact that my son, an African-American boy, wanted to be involved in NASCAR. So now I have 2 sports that are coming up that this lady used to always talk to us about. And I'm like, I can't send her a message anymore. I can't share this picture with her. You see? And I'm like, I'm not even her son. Okay? I'm not even her husband. And I'm just like, even when I hear the state that she lives in now, and the state is right below us, I'm like, wow. Okay? So I don't know what I'm going to do when the time comes that I lose somebody near and dear to me that I see every day. So we have to rethink Mr. Ahmed. So they responded to Mr. Ahmed. Okay? And I'll tell you all a little bit later what they had to say about Mr. Ahmed. These imams, their ages range from 24 to 69. Okay? So that's a pretty wide range of people. Okay? There was one imam, one out of 62, that reported that he had sent one of his followers to a clinician. He said that he had recalled doing that 10 times. That was 1 out of 62. Okay? That was 1 out of 62. That's it. Okay? The others have reported sending somebody to a mental health specialist about 5%. Okay, about 5%. So that's very, very low. Okay. One of the things that came out about in this study was that less than half of the imams actually received counseling training. Okay, so what it amounted to was about 23 of them had received any kind of, counseling training. Okay, some reported that they had taken a college course in like psychology or something like that. Most people have probably taken psychology 101, maybe abnormal psychology and things of that sort. Yeah, some of them reported that. Okay, the least amount of experience that the imams had was in clinical pastoral duties. So they really didn't know the ways and means to talk to people who came to them with problems. All right? And that's also extremely, extremely telling. They didn't know how to really, really listen to the people who were coming to them with problems. And if you need evidence of not being able to listen and understand, I always like to tell the story of the sisters who go to the imams with marital discord, and as soon as the sister says something to the imam tends to ask a question. Do any of you know what the imam often asks the sister? He asks, "What did you do?" And I see the look on faces here. Okay? He asks, "What did you do?" Now, obviously, that does not make that woman feel very comfortable. Okay? What did you do? In some cases, and Allah knows their intention. Their intention is probably extremely good. Okay? Because even when I deal with couples today who talk to me about marital issues, I ask, "What did you do?" But I don't ask from an accusatory standpoint. What I need to know is, what was the other individual responding to? Okay? On both parts, I ask this: what did you do? What did you see? And what did you hear? Because we don't always hear and see what we think we do. Okay? Our perception is jaded. Okay? But that's very, very key. So there's not a lot of pastoral training that imams are getting. Okay? I think the other thing that's very, very key is these 62 imams. Out of these 62 imams, very few of them were employed full-time as imams. Okay? So that makes it very difficult for an imam to be able to respond to one of the members of the community who has a problem. If the imam has to get up to go to work at 6 a.m. in the morning, it's going to be difficult for him to run over to the jail because, brother so-and-so who has been struggling with addiction got caught up because he robbed somebody so he could go get a hit, and now the police have picked him up. And he's calling brother imam at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, "Hey man, I need your help." Brother imam got to go to work in the morning. Okay? Or if brother imam works from 3 to 11, okay, and, little Muhammad got in trouble again at school and beat up a teacher, and now the parents want to talk to brother, imam about little Muhammad, but brother imam, he's at work right now, you see, so he can't deal with that at that time. Okay? There's this idea that's coming up now about mental health first aid, and that means basically the same thing as physical first aid. As soon as it happens, you begin to deal with it, apply pressure to the wound, stop it from bleeding, that kind of stuff. When you have imams who are in voluntary positions, because obviously, we can't afford to pay everybody, right? It makes it difficult for the imam to be able to respond to these kind of mental health concerns. In addition to that, now think about some of the training that the imams don't have. How are they able to respond to these mental health concerns? Okay? One of the things that was interesting about Mr. Ahmed a lot of the imams reported that Mr. Ahmed was depressed because he had a weak personality. A weak personality. And I don't even know what that means. They didn't clarify what that means in the study because they didn't expect for that to be a comment, but that he was experiencing depression because he was weak-minded. Okay? And if you've ever dealt with depression, imagine being sad or being blue and somebody walking up to you and telling you, oh, you're just weak-minded. It's not going to go over too well with you. Okay? There was one comment, or there was a lot of comments, but there's one comment that was particularly interesting. One imam felt as though this study was kind of picking on his